Hello, BookTube. I had an appointment bitterly early this morning in the downtown Boston area, and since it's a lovely day, Boston is currently basking in a bubble of tropical weather, high humidity, relatively mild daytime temperatures. It looks to me like that bubble is ready to burst this weekend. So I figured once I was done, I owed it to myself to walk up the street and go to the Brattle Bookshop for a nice used book haul. Those of you who are new to the channel, there are quite a few of you. We're inching our way closer and closer to 8K. The Brattle is a used bookstore in the heart of downtown Boston that is fantastic. Just 3 floors crammed with every kind of book under the sun, all reasonably priced. Even the 3rd floor, which is antiques and collectibles. And in addition to that, the whole lot next door, where otherwise there would be a tapas bar or something like that, there's just an open lot that the Brattle owns and that they stock with books. With bargain books, $1, $3, and $5 bargain books. Thousands of them, all along the walls and on wheeled carts. And that stock changes often and is not organized in any way. So you can't go to the Brattle carts really hoping to bully them or to game them. Going with a plan is a surefire way to find nothing. But the Brattle has been my daily haunt for half a century. Sometimes literally, because for a long time I worked in retail bookstores in the downtown Boston area. And on my lunch break, much to the bemusement of my coworkers, I would take a break from being surrounded by books to go and surround myself with books. I would go to the Brattle sale lot and just browse around, literally every day. I don't do that anymore. Most often these days, my trips to the Brattle are favors that I'm doing myself after having had an appointment of some kind. So they're not even intentional in a way. They're add-ons to another errand. But I still love it, absolutely love it. And I got a bunch of books, and I learned this morning. Brian at Bookish did a video on how to BookTube. And I didn't learn about that video from my subscription feed, I should point out. I learned about that video from dozens of you sending me emails, because I leave my email on every video. A move that seems more questionable with every passing day. Dozens of you sent me emails asking if I would make my own version of that same video, How to BookTube, where Brian gives a whole bunch of practical and philosophical advice. If I remember, I'll leave a link to his video down below, because it's well worth watching, especially if you're contemplating joining BookTube. But in that video, I learned from him that the YouTube algorithm favors videos that are around 10 minutes long. I don't know if I'm going to be able to stretch this one to 10 minutes, but I'll do my best. I got a bunch of books. And I want to show you all of them here. And in addition, for once in my life, being the totally professional booktuber that I am, I actually took a minute to assemble props. I took a minute to assemble books to show you, in addition to the ones I got, to give fuller context to the ones I got. And I said that that it's bad to go to the Brattle sale lot with a plan. It's, of course, not bad to go to the inside shop with a plan, because everything there is organized and alphabetized. But the sale lot is governed by the gods of luck. And I have always found that if you go there with a plan, I am here at the beginning of this lot. I have an hour to spend sorting through these books, and I want all of the Harry Potter novels. It's been my experience that you not only won't find any of the Harry Potter novels if you go in with that approach, but that you won't find anything else that you want either. The gods pay attention to these things. You have to go with the flow of the cards. You have to embrace the serendipity. And I mean that. I said that you shouldn't go to the sale lot with a plan, and I stand by that. But it's perfectly okay to go to the sale lot with a dream, with a hope. And my dream has been the same every time that I've ever gone there, which is to get keepers, to get books that are coming in this room, in this little book room. I have always had, wherever I've lived, I've always had this little book room, some little space, preferably the smallest room that has a window, that I line with bookshelves all the way to the ceiling, and then I put in my battered old World War I bed, and then I'm set. The battered old World War I bed, walls covered in books, and then add X number of dogs. It's been way up there. That number of dogs has been way up there. Right now it's only one, and a tiny one at that. But the goal, when I go to the Brattle, not so much other used bookstores, because other used bookstores are usually treats. They're usually occasions. I'm usually visiting friends, or I'm visiting someplace other than Boston. And there I'm willing to indulge on a whim. Just for the fun of it, just to get in the spirit of the thing. But when it comes to the Brattle, I try always to get keepers, stuff that I'm going to want to bring in this room, stuff that I'm going to consult enough, love enough, revisit enough, so that it deserves to be in here. No slight intended to I have about 1,000 books in other parts of Hyde Cottage, and there's no slight intended to them, but if I had to choose, of course, if I had to just keep one selection, I would keep this room as opposed to anything else. The others are sort of adjunct to what's in here. I like to think. There's a whole bunch of finessing to be done here. I have often thought that in addition to this being my sanctum sanctorum, my little book room, this ought to be my whole book collection. I've often had that thought. I don't know what we do with the wall space of the rest of this place, but I've often thought that one person doesn't really need a permanent collection of more books than just this. And if that were going to be true, for instance, number one, the first thing that would have to happen is that I would have to go through this room with the scythe of the Lord and clear off at least one whole floor-to-ceiling bookcase that I would then use for biographies. There are no biographies in this room. Almost none right now. They're all in their own bookcases in another room. Biographies are my favorite kind of reading. They would have to be represented in here. That would mean things in here would have to go. I have often thought of that. I've often thought particularly about the Penguin Wall. I don't know if you can see there. The Penguin Walls consist of 2 narrow bookcases and 1 wide bookcase in the middle. And I've often thought that maybe one person only needs that one big, broad bookcase in the middle of penguins. And that if I were to go through, as I'm doing with my daily penguin collection, if I were to go through and winnow out all the doubles, all the books that are penguin classics, yes, but not favorites of mine or whatever, that I could get rid of 200 of the books on that wall and thereby free up 2 whole bookcases. Which, if I shifted things around a bit, put books from other shelves onto there, I could empty a whole bookcase and fill it with not, 300 biographies like I have in the other rooms, but maybe 100 of the 100 biographies that I really love, that I really want to keep. And if I did that and just consigned the other biographies to excess, then I would be able to fit my whole collection in this room. It's a dream. I often think about it. I don't think I'm going to come any closer to doing it now than I ever have. But the goal always, the hope, the dream at the Brattle is to find keepers. And I have a hope that I found quite a few keepers today. And the first one illustrates another rule of the Brattle, which is that if you wait long enough, if you're careful and assiduous enough, the Brattle will provide. I always say that because if I am looking for something, if I have not a plan, but a hankering, where I, let's say, find a book and it's part 1 of 4 at the Brattle, and I don't see any of the other parts at the Brattle, I'll often get that book, even if it's part 3 of 4. I'll often get it because the person who sold that to the Brattle, however many months ago, probably sold the others too. And if I'm careful, if I'm watchful enough in the sale lot, they will appear. And I felt that way. I found this book today. This is The Saturday Club, 1957 to 1986. There are a long list of the luminaries. It was a private club here in Boston. It was a literary club. At least it began that way. And every literary figure in the world went to that, was a member of that club, wrote for its various satellite periodicals, talked to each other about its work. The Saturday Club is in part the inspiration for one of my contending ideas for this year's NaNoWriMo at the Eliot Annex, which would be essentially about turn of the 20th century Boston's intellectual elite and the fervor of creativity that took place at that time. This volume is the Saturday Club 1957 to 1986, when that intellectual fervor was well and truly over, and when the Saturday Club was shifting into senescence. And I grabbed it right away because, as you have seen on this channel, there is a multi-volume history of the Saturday Club. I found this volume a while ago. This is the Saturday Club, 1920 to 1956. Same thing, list of luminaries on the cover. And then before that, I found this, the early years of the Saturday Club, 1855 to 1870. Which is fairly battered. I've had to reinforce this on the inside with not only packing tape, but duct tape to make sure that it stands up to revisiting, because I do revisit these volumes. And as you can tell, if you're keeping track of those dates, these two, see, I have my props. I have my props already. These two were already on my shelf, and now I have this one, 1857 to 1986, which means that I have 1855 to 1870, 1920 to 1956, and 1957 to 1986. So the volume I am missing is A History of the Saturday Club from 1871 to 1920. That is what I'm missing. And I know that it will turn up. Now, obviously, the same person didn't sell these to the Brattle. And it's been a while. This has been a while. This has been years that I've been slowly assembling these. This is the final volume in which I would have any interest. If there was a Saturday Club history after this one, I wouldn't bother with it. But I do want that one remaining volume. That one remaining volume that covers exactly the years I'm talking about, the greatest of the years of the Saturday Club. And maybe the Brattle will provide, but I couldn't. This thing will give me endless amounts of interesting reading. So I couldn't leave it. I had to grab it. And when I saw it, History of the Saturday Club, I thought naturally, okay, here's one volume that I don't have, and what about the other volume that I don't have? Is it possible that it will be here? You don't want to press that thought too hard. The gods are listening. And if you start to expect it, this volume could disappear from your hand. That's how bad it is. That's how much you must respect the kismet of the cards. But I started to think, well, you know, a book like this would never occur in isolation. No way. This had to be bought from somebody's collection, and who knows what else they collected. Did they collect any other Saturday Club histories? And then as I was browsing, I realized what may be the explanation. And not Saturday Club, but New England, Boston and New England history. Because I found a bunch of those books in a row. And again, I want to stress, if you go looking for that, you are doing the cards wrong. But if it just happens, well, that's different. I found, for instance, this is, and I have props for this as well. This is an absolute classic. It's such a delightful little thing. This is by John Gould, and it's called Farmer Takes a Wife, in which he brings his Boston-born wife to his town, to his little farm in Maine. And she experiences all the wonders of small-town Maine. At the time this was written in, when was this? Let me see if I can find out. 1942. When this was written in 1942, there was no such thing as any other kind of Maine but small-town Maine. There very closely isn't now, but even after half a century. But back then, it was all small-town Maine. And this is so delightful, and it was a hit for the author. A hit. And the author was an indefatigable writer, wrote all the time, and had a column that he wrote all the time for the Christian Science Monitor. And Down East Books made that column into a couple of volumes. This trifling distinction, and you should start sooner. Two wonderful, new, you can see this still has pub sheets in it, wonderful collections of some of the best, some of the hits of those columns. And when I was reading these and firing off emails to the publicists and praising my lucky stars that these things existed at all, how wonderful it was to revisit John Gould's column for the Monitor, how wonderful it was. When I was reading these, I was thinking, well, yeah, that is absolutely great. This is an author who, the whole selling point is the voice. You don't really need to care about any of the things he talks about in these columns. You don't really need to care about rural Maine life, Maine farm life. You mainly care about being in the company of the author. You get that after a few seconds, and I was bought hook, line, and sinker. And when I was reading these, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to have Farmer Takes a Wife? And here I found it in a beautiful little hardcover that somebody's already put a plexiglass with these polyurethane thing on. So this can go straight in this room, which is great. That is a great feeling. And the New England stuff continues. In my last Q&A on this channel, somebody brought up Van Wyck Brooks, who was a stiff old poobah of the New England school, who wrote lots and lots of histories of the New England area, literary histories, cultural histories that are really good reading, really enjoyable. They're all, I think, out of print now, even New England Indian Summer, I think, is out of print now. But boy, oh boy, were they great. Great finds. If you're at a yard sale or flea market or whatever and you encounter anything by this author, grab it and give it a try, especially if it's dirt cheap. And typical synchronicity, when a name comes up on BookTube or in conversation, it'll then turn up at the Brattle. And I found this thing, A New England Reader, which is an anthology that Van Wyck Books put together. That's himself. Of famous New England writers, bits and pieces. Ordinarily, an anthology like this by a name at the time that this came out. This was in 1960s. Is that right? 1962. At the time this came out, Van Wyck Books was a name. And ordinarily what would happen here is that the publisher would set up a committee or a group of underlings or whatever to do the selections. And the most you would get for your money of edited with an introduction by would be the introduction at the last minute and uneditable. But in this case, I don't think so. In this case, I think that Brooks picked these things himself. I have never read this. I have sold it, but I've never read this anthology. And I love anthologies, especially if they have a great sense of their own self. So then this next one is going to need a little bit of reinforcement. It's going to come in this room, and it definitely is. I don't know quite how to... it's called Boston Statues. And it's by Walter Muir Whitehill, who was forever, and it was a dear, dear man, a dear, sweet man, and who was forever and ever and ever the library director of the Boston Athenaeum, a very old private library here in Boston, up on Beacon Hill. He was for a long, long time the librarian and director of the Boston Athenaeum, and wrote a lot of books, including one that I used to recommend to everybody that would ask me for a history of Boston, a one-volume history of Boston. People would say, what can you recommend? Most of them are terrible. And I would recommend he wrote a book called A Topographical History of Boston. Boston, A Topographical History, which is all about building in Boston. He had a deep and abiding interest in the architectural life and the public space life of Boston. And Boston, A Topographical History is still an incredible book to find. If you find it in a used bookstore, grab it if you want to know more about Beantown. This is a slimmer thing. This is, well, let me show you here. It's just... you get a black and white photo of this is all the public statuary in Boston. So you get a black and white photo and then a paragraph about the statue. You get the location of where it is. Let's get you some others here. There's Benjamin Franklin outside the old City Hall. Well, you get the point. There's Sir Henry Vane, Handsome Harry, in the front entrance to the old library, and he gives you a wonderful description of each of these statues, who the person is, and a little bit of the genesis of the statue, and that's fantastic because the back that is Leif Erikson, Anne Whipple's statue of Leif Erikson. I don't think you can make it out, but he has metal plates over his breasts, and he's wearing a miniskirt, and he is gazing west. He's gazing west to his Nordic homeland. Although I think Walter points out in here when he gets to that statue that by the time this thing was made, this was made again, I think in the 60s, 1970. By the time this thing was made, Leif Erikson was staring at a highway overpass. And he didn't look anything like that. Anne Whitney had a romantic streak in her, but her romantic streak resulted in oh yeah, there we go. There's the Shaw Memorial. But I go St. Gaudens. But her romantic streak resulted in a great statue of Samuel Adams, looking like more heroic than Samuel Adams ever looked in real life. That it used to be in Adams Square and is now directly outside Faneuil Hall Marketplace. So lots of tourists see it and take a picture with it every day. Or did, before the pandemic. Yes, there's Anne Whitney's statue of Samuel Adams. That's from its old location. He's not liberally streaked in bird crap anymore. The statue is cleaned up and is now in a better place, a better location. It's terrific to have this. Just terrific. I will reinforce it, and it is part of the pod of New England books that I found. And the last one of these, the last New England related book, is a little bit on the melancholy side. I've wanted this book for a while, but there are circumstances under which I would want it a lot more that will now never come to pass. This is Built in Boston, City and Suburb, by Douglas Shand-Tucci, the great Ralph Adams Cram biographer, the great Boston historian Douglas Shand-Tucci, who did this thing in 1970. Okay. All right, this is 1978 that this came out. I didn't notice that this is inscribed by Douglas for Joe Kennedy. That's kind of weird. Okay. This has a foreword by Walter Muir Whitehill, and it is a sort of a architectural historian's view of the same kind of thing, Boston topographical history. The different styles of buildings, the different expansions of Boston, the different characters, the different neighborhoods. And there's going to be a picture, isn't there? Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. All right, there is our historian as a very, very young man. Oh my God. I hardly recognize him. I came to know Douglas late in his life, 50 years after this book came out. I came to know him and convinced him to do some late-in-life writing, remarkable late-in-life writing for Open Letters Monthly, the online literary journal where I was at the time the managing editor. So I got the incredible thrill, the amazing experience of being Douglas Shand-Tucci's editor, which is not an experience that's been given to many people. As he pointed out to me over many a lunch, I was his favorite editor after a man named Cass Canfield. And when Douglas told me that originally, in fact, for the whole time that he told me, I never actually revealed to him that I used to know Cass Canfield, and that is an incredible compliment in a whole bunch of different ways. Douglas was what was known in the old school world of editing as a tough edit, and that means not that he knew too little, but that he knew way too much. So he had very specific demands about virtually every line of every piece, and the pieces were 10,000 words long. And the only way that was going to work as an editorial relationship, the only way that was going to work, is if I didn't roll over on every one of those, which meant that editing a Douglas Shand-Tucci piece for publication took 10, 15 times longer than editing any other piece for the monthly issue. And it was worth it. It was very much worth it. And the reason this is melancholy is because Douglas just recently died. He died, I think, a year ago, 2 years ago, something like that. And I look back on that association and I have regrets. And there's nothing you can do about that because I wasn't thinking clearly enough at the time. In my own defense, I had 2 dying dogs and wasn't in the best of health myself. But even so, what I should have done, I encouraged Douglas to write. Absolutely. I encouraged him with a big project about Copley Square, about this same subject, only with a half century more of experience and writing ability. It's an amazing Baroque writing style. Takes a little bit of getting used to, but oh my, is it worth it? And I encouraged him to do that, and we had dreams of much bigger projects and future projects. But what I should have done, in addition to getting a copy of this book at the Brattle, I'm sure that I could have found one and having him sign it to me instead of Joe Kennedy. What I should have done was keep encouraging him to write those regular pieces for Open Letters Monthly, absolutely. But also get him to write a memoir, a historian's life, a Boston historian's life. Get him to write just a classic memoir. So personal upbringing, youth and whatnot, and then your professional life and what the world was like. Include all of those Cass Canfield anecdotes and all the other anecdotes, but having your book reviewed with a full-color illustration by Barry Moser on the front page of the New York Times Book Review, and so on and so forth. Being recognized fairly early on in his middle age as the world's leading authority on Ralph Adams Cram, for instance, and a bunch of other stuff too. That should have been my priority. That book is something that literally only Douglas could have written, and I was in a position where I was literally the only person who could have gotten him to do it, and I didn't do it. So the world doesn't have that book, in part because of me, and that feels terrible. As a lifelong prizer of books out of people, one of the weird talents that I have, one of the things I love to do, and I flatter myself that I'm a little good at it, is to grope around inside someone find the book and then latch onto it with pincers and pull it out of them, even when they're fighting me the whole time, which they usually do. I have a very long track record of doing that, and it has always felt fantastic. And for some odd reason, maybe we were having a tiff that week over some meaningless little trifle, but for some odd reason, I didn't do that with Douglas. So the world's not underrepresented with Douglas Shand-Tucci books. There are lots of them. A Crimson Letter about being gay at Harvard when you couldn't be openly gay is fantastic. His biography of Isabella Stewart Gardner is really, really good. His various elaborations on architectural histories of Boston are all great. His Ralph Adam Cram's book are great. The writing that he did for Open Letters, for that Gods of Copley Square feature, that thing that was going to become a book, all of that is great. I don't know if it exists anymore. I don't know if it survived the various permutations of Open Letters Monthly, but it was a privilege. And we were working on things. The world has plenty of Douglas Shand-Tucci, but I still kick myself because I could have gotten him to write that book. I feel certain I could have, and I didn't. For whatever reason, I didn't. I was distracted, or we were occasionally locking horns. But at least now I have this. At least now I have Built in Boston, which will come right in this room. It is a classic architectural history of Boston. And that was the New England thread here. Not planned. I wasn't expected in any way. Then we'll move on from there. I still have more props. Like, for instance, I found this thing, Aspects of Aristocracy by David Kennedy, who's a great historian and a fantastic book critic. Just fantastic. That's essentially what this book is, just a collection of book reviews that he arranged along a theme. He didn't write them along a theme. He wrote them when he got the book in the mail and the editor was good for the money. But then he organized it into the peak of Edwardian aristocracy in England and then the decline all the way through the 20th century in book reviews, in biographical portraits. This is a neat little Penguin trade paperback that will replace this. This is the hardcover volume of Aspects of Aristocracy that I have had for years. And it's great, but it's Yale, and I love me the folks at Yale, but I'd rather have this form, especially since it matches this form. This is History in Our Time. Again, this is just a collection of book reviews of figures in history. That's what he pretty much always did. So you can make a book along a theme. And these two go together fairly well and take up a lot less space. Together they take up as much space as this one book does. So Aspects of Aristocracy was a bit of a find. I was happy about that. Then I found, for dirt cheap, all of this stuff was just on credit. And I had a generous amount of credit, so I wasn't out of pocket for any of this. I found this famous big orange-spined Penguin trade paperback of Post-War by Tony Judt. A fantastic, fantastic book that I have had in this format time and time again, and I always give it away. And then I found it in a different format. I found it, or rather, I saw it on Book Depository in this format. Look at this here. You know the lighting? Is the lighting working in our favor? Look at that. It's got embossed letters. It's smaller and squatter. And one of you sent this to me as a present. When I mentioned that I was coveting it on Book Depository, one of you sent it, said, I already have it. Let me send it to you. It's not nearly as big as the classic orange-spined one, and would have done just fine, but this was there and it was dirt cheap, so I grabbed it. Just to have a big floppy penguin. Sometimes you just want a big floppy penguin. Then the next one is an Oxford trade paperback. I've had this many, many times. I give it as presents to people all the time because it is a fantastic anthology. It's the Oxford Book of Ireland, edited by Patricia Craig, with the French flaps there, and it is just a sprawling anthology of poetry and plays and nonfiction and travel writing, all about Ireland in all different time periods and moods. Wonderful, a wonderful anthology that I noticed as soon as I saw this. I just flashed to my bookshelves here in this room and realized that I'm in between copies of this thing. I give it away all the time, and as soon as I saw it, I realized this is one of those times where you don't have a copy, so now I do, and that's great. Then this next one is a hardcover of a very old book. The book is from the 19-teens, is that right? 1934. This originally published in 1934, I think. This is Alexander Woolcott, who was once upon a time America's leading public intellectual in very 1930s kind of way. And this is While Rome Burns, a hardcover of a collection of pieces of his, just occasional ruminations, sometimes about Broadway plays, sometimes profiles for the New Yorker, sometimes book reviews, that sort of thing. And I grabbed this right away because I love it. I go back to it a lot. But the format that I go back to it in is this. This is a little pocket book from the 1960s. These things, some of you will know, the ones that have these red interiors. These things are rocks. They are really put together well. The paper is not pulp, so it is still holding up just fine. And the binding is incredible. The binding on these things is amazing. For these very early pocket books. I have a handful of them, but this is too small to annotate. It's a little bit uninviting to reread. So when I saw a hardcover with a dust jacket of this thing, well, I grabbed it, of course. And While Rome Burns is just one of these. Pocket Books also did another Woolcott volume, whose name is escaping me at the moment. I have it in this format. But naturally, when I saw this, I thought, okay, maybe somebody had that as well in a hardcover with a dust jacket from the 1930s, so I will keep an eye out for it. But this is, Woolcott is a bit of an acquired taste. He is very much in the H.L. Mencken school of humor that was so prevalent in the 20s and the teens, where being intelligent itself, just being articulate, is the joke. That wears awful thin with H.L. Mencken. For me, it wears awful thin. That hauling out of a big word just so that all the kids in Brooklyn can laugh, and you hope they're laughing with you, and for once they won't give you a wedgie or a Woody or the dreaded Rear Admiral. That kind of thing, that kind of self-hating apologia for intelligence always really, really bothers me, especially as a grounds for humor. But Woolcott doesn't always do that. So a lot of his occasional writing is just straight up occasional writing, and it's really, really good. Then these next two are Scribner illustrated editions. I've said on this channel many times how much I love them. They're all by N.C. Wyeth, and I wish I had them all. I have at times had them all, and now I have Kidnapped, I think, or no, Treasure Island, Last of the Mohicans, and a couple of others. I don't have anywhere near as many as I would like. I would like the whole run of these things, and I found two of them for dirt cheap out in the sale lot with ragged dust jackets. This one is David Balfour by Robert Louis Stevenson with a sun-faded spine, but otherwise fine. And this next one, the sun fading is complete. The spine is virtually unreadable, and this is The Deerslayer by James Fenimore Cooper. These are two books that I dearly love. They're two books that I know virtually by heart. And I saw them both like this. They have ratty dust jackets, and they have lots of sun damage, one much more than the other, on the spine. And I immediately thought of Jason Harrigan at Byways in Bookland. I immediately thought of the phrase a reading copy. He's a book collector, in addition to being a book fan, and will often get what he calls a reading copy of a book, where it doesn't really matter what condition it's in because you already have a fine edition that's going to stay on the shelf. And I got these things. They were dirt cheap, so I grabbed them both, and I thought, even if the spines are faded, the pictures on the inside will be fine, and these can be reading copies until I find much better copies. And then when I got them back here, I realized something. The Deerslayer, if you take the dust jacket off, everything looks better. The colors are so much brighter. They just jump right out. They're not faded by the sun at all. So I saw that and was overjoyed. And I thought, is the same thing going to be true of poor David Balfour? And it is. Hugely it is. Infinitely better. Look at that. Look at the shading, the color there. So these dust jackets served their purpose. They protected the unprotected book from the ravages of the sun. I am not going to keep these in the sun, so I'm just going to take the dust jackets off. They'll still be reading copies. I got back here and realized that I have a dust jacketed, perfect condition copy of Deerslayer. I just grab these things whenever I see them. So really the only addition here is David Balfour, and I still have plenty to go. I don't have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I don't have, you name it. I have hardly any. I have Last Mohicans. I have Treasure Island. I have the Deerslayer, but I have hardly any others, so I want them all. Sooner or later, the Brattle will provide. But I thought that was wonderful. The naked hardcovers of these things will work just fine. Look fantastic. That's great. And then we'll finish up with 2 biographical studies. It wouldn't be a trip to the Brattle without a big fat biography. The first one is more political than biographical. I remember reading this when it first came out back in the 80s. Is that right? 1987, 88. And I loved it. I loved it for how pugnacious it was, how argument starting it was, and I'm perfectly willing to read it again. Absolutely. So let's make sure that Martine is out of the room. If Peg could maybe tell Martine that she smells something burning in the kitchen. And we'll wait a few seconds until Martine is out of earshot, and then we will hold up her face. That dreaded face. This is Peter Jenkins, Mrs. Thatcher's Revolution. It's really a political biography of the heyday of Margaret Thatcher, the pinnacle of her power. And I remember it being just terrific, punchy, Fleet Street style writing. But that was a long time ago. I haven't read this since then, since the late 80s, when everything in the world made sense. So a thrill to read it again now, especially with Britain in a political state that would have been the stuff of Margaret Thatcher's nightmares, having these pygmy morons running the country. Say what you want about her, she was neither a pygmy nor a moron. It'll be great to read this again. I have a feeling it will probably be a biography or a biographical treatment of Margaret Thatcher that I keep, although not in this room. And this next one's a big fat biography of Sir John Vanbrugh, who was a popular writer, a playwright. He wrote a play called The Provoked Wife that is still known. It's still taught in school. I don't think you'll ever see a Vanbrugh production on stage, but The Provoked Wife is still at least known. It's not a complete footnote in theatrical history. And he was also an architect who designed Howard Castle, which a lot of you will know as the grounds for Brideshead Revisited, and also Blenheim Palace, which is no small feat if you're an architect to say that you designed Blenheim Palace. He designed a bunch of other stuff too. Once upon a time, about 10 years ago, there was a big, beautiful illustrated volume of his architectural designs, the stuff that we know, the stuff that remains in part or in whole. I wrote a review of that for the National in Abu Dhabi. I had a British expat editor, and even he, with his own patronym on the line, was a little iffy about whether or not anybody would care about a biography of this guy. And I had to pitch it really hard, and I made sure to write the piece so that anybody would find it interesting. Again, no idea if that piece is findable. I will, if I can find it, I will try. But there you go. Good Lord. That was a Brattle haul. So we're going to try and do a Steve Pyramid here, but this is a lot of books. So we have Sir John Vanbrugh. This is by Kerry Downes. It is the definitive life and times of John. There are better architectural studies and of course better literary studies, but in terms of the whole life, this is hands down the best. Then we have Mrs. Thatcher's Revolution, a political biography of Margaret Thatcher in her prime. We have The Deerslayer by James Fenimore Cooper, the further adventures of Natty Bumppo. Nobody reads the Lethingstocking tales anymore, but I love them, dearly love them. And David Balfour by Robert Louis Stevenson, ditto. He's incredible and nobody reads him. Then we have Wild Rome Burns by Alexander Woolcott, the town crier. We have The Oxford Book of Ireland by Patricia Craig. Glad to have a copy. Hope I can hold on to this one. We have Post-War by Tony Judd. This is a Penguin trade. Let's see here. Architecturally, how are we going to do this so that we can stay? Boston Statues by Walter Muir Whitehill. A New England Reader by Van Wyck Brooks. The Saturday Club, the latest in my ongoing quest to get all 4 volumes. Built in Boston by the late and lamented Douglas Shand-Tucci. Aspects of Aristocracy. Oh no! It wasn't meant to be. Aspects of Aristocracy by David Kennedy, and Farmer Takes a Wife by John Gould. So you know that it's a good Brattle book haul when it collapses under its own weight. You know that that's good. So I'm pleased. I'm going to have a great time just glomming all over these books. And let's see. Let's do since we're over 10 minutes anyway. Aspects of Aristocracy. The Oxford Book of Ireland. Farmer Takes a Wife, Boston Statues, The Saturday Club, and Built in Boston. So that's 6. These 6 books, at least these 6 are coming in here. That's not bad. As a percentage, that's not bad. So so that is it. That is our Brattle book haul for today. Sorry for the length. I will wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.